Hi there, my name's Ken Irvine. I'm the Education Coordinator at Guelph Museums. I'd like to tell you about horse racing in Guelph's past. Today, when we see horse in the city, it's in a parade or it's pulling a wedding carriage. Horses are kind of out of place in today's Guelph. But if we want to see horses, we have to drive to the countryside or go to a horse race track or even to riding stables, just a short drive out of the city. But in Guelph's early years, when horses were the main source of transportation, horse racing was really popular and provided an economic boom for the city. One of the first records of organized horse racing in Guelph was in the summer of 1847. The race was sponsored by the Guelph Turf Club, and the race course was to be on the St. George's parsonage lands. And the parsonage lands used for the races were bordered by Queen Street, Palmer Street, and Grange Street, which is right behind me. Palmer Street and Stewart Street. It's right up on St. George's Park area on the Grange Hill. Hundreds of people were expected to attend the races, but not everyone was happy about the races, and especially where the races were to be run. St. George's Church had leased their parsonage lands to John Wilson, and he was going to use them for agricultural purposes. But then John Wilson leased the lands to another person who then planned on holding horse races on these lands. Well, Reverend Arthur Palmer, who lives just down the street here, he was not very happy when he learned that horse racing was to be taking place on his church lands. And he wrote a letter to John Wilson stating his unhappiness in converting the church lands into a race course. And he wrote, "Any advantage to the improvement of their breed is dearly purchased by the demoralizing effects produced by horse racing in gambling, swearing, and drunkenness that it generates in the number of thoughtless and unprincipled persons it attracts to a place." He also said it diffuses habits specially ill-suited to Canadian life. The Guelph Turf Club went ahead with the races, even though Reverend Palmer was opposed to it. And the race was very well organized and widely advertised. The purse for the first race, held in September of 1847, was £10, and this was for horses that were the property of the Township of Guelph residents. Also included in the race program was hurdle races and pony races. And in spite of Reverend Palmer's really vocal disapproval of the parsonage lands being used for horse races, the races were run and they were really successful and very popular. So horse racing continued yearly with the Turf Club. And the Turf Club organized and acquired sponsors for the races. The downtown merchants were thrilled to have the extra business that was brought in on race days, and hotels were fully booked throughout the city. In 1859, the highlight of the racing season in Ontario was the first ever running of the Queen's Plate. The prize money for the main race was said to be provided by Queen Victoria. Well, this race is now only run at Woodbine Racetrack in Toronto, but in the 1860s, the race was held at different venues. The Guelph Turf Club lobbied for the race to come to Guelph. And in 1864, Viscount Monk, the Governor General of Canada, he gave Guelph the opportunity to hold the race. Guelph is a fairly small town with a population of only about 3,000 people then, but it was up to the challenge. The Governor General may have been persuaded by the directors of the Turf Club, like Sheriff Grange, Dr. William Clark, or J.J. Kingsmill, who all held public office and had many political dealings with the Governor General. The racetrack was now located outside the town's limits, near Gray's Inn. Today, the 1 mile track would be near the corner of Aramossa Road and Victoria Road, right here. And the Queen's Plate in 1864 was open to any horse bred in Upper Canada that had not won a race previously. And the winner would receive a purse of 50 gold sovereigns, which is a huge amount. Carpenters were hired to expand the grandstands and add additional seating for the women. The racing program was enhanced with 3 full days of racing, scheduled from July 5th to the 7th. 2 days before the races started, hotels in town were fully booked. Trains brought hundreds of people into the city for the races. Vendors who set up lunch stands were extremely busy, and the taverns were almost drunk dry. Some workers were given the day off to attend the event. In the weeks before the races, the weather was hot and dry, which caused the traffic up Aramossa Road to create clouds of dust, which choked many of the pedestrians making their way up the hill to the track. And according to the Mercury, as every carriage passed, another dust bowl had to be endured. There were people of all levels of society attending the event. The Mercury wrote that there were fast young men with white turbans, a sprinkling of older sporting gents who were veterans in horse racing. There was also a sprinkling of young ladies who had doubts in their minds as whether they should be there or not, besides a scattering of old dowagers who evidently felt that their presence there was sufficient to make the affair fashionable. It was a grand collection of characters. The Mercury also commented that there was an absence of gamblers with roulette tables, but there were a few peep shows on the grounds. The Queen's Plate race consisted of 3 heats, and a horse named Brunetta, owned by Dr. Morrison, won 2 of the 3 heats to win the 50 gold sovereign purse. And during the next 2 days, races were held, but they weren't as busy as the Queen's Plate run, and they were not as popular. Once the races ended, some of the horse owners stayed in Guelph to attend some social events that were hosted by George Sleeman, owner of the Sleeman Breweries. And he also had horses entered in the races during those 3 days. The running of the 5th Queen's Plate by the Guelph Turf Club was a really great success. And Guelph's small population had shown that it was able to host a prestigious event that attracted thousands of visitors to the city. With this in mind, the township looked to host an exhibition or fair similar to the Western Fair in London, and also have a permanent racetrack. It was thought that the fair would be well supported, as the Guelph and Wellington County provided the 2nd largest number of exhibits for the provincial fair in Toronto. The fairgrounds where the Guelph Armory now stands were not large enough to host the fair, so the town looked for available land and explored the Catholic glebe that was north of London Road, which is where we are now. The glebe land of 33 acres was purchased in 1871 for $5,000. The city paid $1,000 a year to the Hamilton Diocese until it was paid off in 1875. And this became Guelph's first official park. It was hoped that the county would insist in buying the land, but they declined. The county did give $3,000 to the running of the very first exhibition held here. But the name Exhibition Park came from the fact that agricultural exhibitions organized by the South Wellington Agricultural Society were held here. Within 2 years of purchase, there were numerous exhibition buildings set up along in through the park area, as well as a main exhibition hall called the Palace, and you can see a picture of it here. The Palace was a large wooden structure with a central dome and 4 wings. It was standing at almost the center of the park. And here you can see a picture of the outside and the inside of the palace. And the outside is when there was a military review in 1916. There was also a high board fence surrounding the grounds, and there were 2 ticket booths at the south end of the park. The exhibition fair was very popular, and thousands of people attended every year. Within the fenced grounds, there was a half-mile racetrack that was in regular use throughout the racing season. And here you can see a bird's eye view of the exhibition grounds and the racetrack part of it. The racetrack was a dangerous track as the ends were not banked up, and there was only 1 railing around the track to protect onlookers. But every Wednesday afternoon, there was a program of horse races. And usually there was a half-day holiday for some of the downtown stores too. Here you can see a picture of George Palmer driving a horse and buggy in an exhibition park. So horse racing was held here right up until the start of the First World War. And the fair that once drew thousands of people to the park was no longer run, as it wasn't able to compete with the big fairs in Toronto. As more cars and trucks were being used in the city, the number of horses on Guelph streets was steadily declining. And with fewer horses around, there was less interest in horse racing. And by 1919, the track here at Exhibition Park was no longer used for just horses. It was shared by the Royal City Cycle Club and by car and motorcycle race clubs. And you can actually see a sports car here at Exhibition Park. By 1925, the fences and the exhibition buildings in the park were torn down, and a baseball stadium was built in behind me. Not this one, but one earlier. There would be another racetrack in Guelph on Woodlawn Road, where the Skyjack factory is now located, was the Royal City Turf Club half-mile track. A gentleman named George Lasby built this track for harness racing in 1950, but there wasn't a whole lot of money being made in harness racing. So he also ran stock car races on Saturday nights. And here you can see an aerial view of the racetrack. And these races were so popular that the 1,100-seat stadium was filled to overflowing on race nights. And the popularity of racing was really growing. And as the end of the season in 1952 happened, people were really looking forward to the upcoming year's racing. But unfortunately for race enthusiasts, the land where the track was rezoned for industrial use. And the following year, General Electric bought the land and built a factory there. So while there hasn't been horse racing or any racing in Guelph for many years, there are still two horse tracks about 25 kilometers away, one in the north and one in the south of Guelph. And I wonder if Arthur Palmer would be happy to know there aren't any horse races and that the demoralizing effects of racing are no longer being held on church property or in Guelph.